We are now literally only 2 days away from Apple's WWDC event, and I am extremely hyped because we are very likely to see some hardware reveals or even some releases. So in this video, I'm basically gonna go through all the leaks for the upcoming Mac Pro and the upcoming redesigned M2 MacBook Air and talk about which one of those two is the most likely to be revealed. So before I jump right in and start talking about the chances of a Mac Pro being revealed or released, I want to mention that Luke Miani just tweeted out that he is 100% sure that there will be some hardware at WWDC. Now, he wouldn't necessarily count on being able to buy it right away, but he's 100% sure that some hardware is being announced. Now, in terms of the Mac Pro leaks, I do believe that we should be seeing it very soon, definitely this year, because at Apple's last event, which was in March, Apple teased the Apple Silicon Mac Pro, saying that they still have to talk about it. Here, listen for yourself.
Making our transition nearly complete with just one more product to go, Mac Pro.
There you go, he just teased the Mac Pro, saying that the Apple Silicon transition is nearly complete, and since it's a 2-year transition, it should be here sometime this year. Now, some of the leaks go way back to December of last year, when Mark Gurman said that Apple is planning 5 new Macs for 2022, including a new Mac Pro with Apple Silicon. Now, going even further back, in May of 2021, Mark Gurman was saying that the Apple Silicon Mac Pro may feature up to 32 high-performance cores and 128 core option for the graphics. So it's basically going to be a 40 core with 32 high performance and 8 efficiency cores. And of course, we haven't seen this chip yet because the current M1 Ultra chip is only a 20 core. It's actually 2 M1 Max dies put together, which is codenamed Jade 2C die. And what makes this interesting is that Mark Gurman leaked the Jade 4C die, which is basically 4 of the M1 Maxes put together to create the 40 core chip that he's talking about right here. And the craziest part of all is that Shrimp Apple Pro recently leaked a bunch of different chip information, and he confirmed that the M1 Extreme, or the Jade 4C die, does exist. So it's not some kind of leak that didn't happen. It actually exists out there somewhere, and Apple is likely testing it right now. And adding on to that, we actually got some leaks from Majin Buu, who said, based on his sources, here's some official information on the new Mac Pro 2022. Yes, this year. He showed a bridge that connects 2 M1 Ultra chips together to create the Jade 4C die, and it's going to be found in the 2022 Mac Pro. He says the processor's name is Redfern, and he says they're going to be coming with the new Mac Pros this September, which is a very interesting release date because it doesn't really make sense for an Apple event to be in September except for the iPhone event, so that would mean Apple would need an event first to reveal the Mac Pro before releasing it later, which it only makes sense to be WWDC. And as you can see in this image, we can see the Ultra Fusion links combining 4 different dies right over here in this corner. However, the really weird thing is that Mark Gurman later tweeted out that this is what he's expecting Apple's Mac lineup to look like by the end of 2023, and that includes a Mac Pro with an M2 Ultra and M2 Extreme. So that's based on the M2 instead of the M1. And he even says that the M2 Extreme is going to have 48 CPU cores potentially, which sounds crazy, and 96 or 128 graphics cores. So he says they might actually base it on the M2 chip instead. And then in April, he said that Apple is testing at least 9 new Macs with 4 different M2 chip variants, and that included a couple of MacBook Pros with the M2 Pro and M2 Max chips, and a Mac Pro that will include a successor to the M1 Ultra used in the Mac Studio. So I don't know if that means an M2 Ultra or an M2 Extreme. I personally think he does mean the Extreme model. But I do want to remind everybody that Apple could totally call it a different chip name. For example, the X1, to kind of put it into a different, more advanced category or class. Now going further, McGuire Wood on Twitter said that he believes the Mac Pro may get a teaser but will not see a full announcement. So it kind of matches up to Majin Buu's leak, where it could come in September or maybe even later, but it could get an actual teaser at WWDC. And that's exactly what Mark Gurman said way back in January, saying that I don't don't believe the Mac Pro will be released at WWDC, rather announced. And he says that because he believes that the Apple Silicon transition should be finished out by June, and that's gonna happen by announcing or teasing the Mac Pro. And that brings me to a tweet from Sammy Fathy, who said that the Mac Pro and Studio Display Pro could get previewed at WWDC with an entirely new series of Apple Silicon chip, and that's more likely to him than the MacBook Air. And he also once again mentioned that the Mac Pro will not have an M series chip, but it could be something like the Z1 or an X1, which I also agree with. And if you don't know where that Studio Display Pro idea came from, it's actually from Ross Young, who's a very reliable analyst in terms of displays. He said he's still expecting a 27-inch mini LED display from Apple in June, and he said it could be called the Studio Display Pro, and he says production has already started on the display. And then I asked him if it could be alongside a new Mac Pro, and he said yes, that is our thinking. So he thinks it could get revealed, the Mac Pro and the display, at WWDC. However, recently he just came out and said that the 27-inch monitor has been delayed as it was being produced at Quanta in Shanghai, which has been locked down. So he thinks it now looks like an October release instead of a September release. And you never know, maybe Apple's just gonna hold onto it until later on in the fall, or maybe even December like they did in the past with the Mac Pro. However, there was Ming-Chi Kuo who came out earlier this year and said that he believes the Mac Pro is not coming until 2023, which kind of sounds insane to me because if you think about it, Apple did tease the Mac Pro at the spring event. So imagine if they teased it and literally didn't say anything for an entire year until 2023. That would just be kind of like clickbait and would be very annoying. So I do think that at WWDC, we're gonna be getting a Mac Pro teaser, but not the full announcement. And with that said, let's jump into the leaks for the redesigned M2 MacBook Air. Now, going all the way back to January of 2021, Mark Gurman leaked the thinner and lighter high-end MacBook Air with MagSafe that could launch in the second half of 2021, which obviously did not happen because we're now in 2022 now, so I think it's getting very, very close. But the point about the high-end MacBook Air that I want to highlight is I think that the regular M1 MacBook Air could stick around in the lineup at the same price or maybe $900. And then this new M2 redesigned MacBook Air is going to be available at a higher price, maybe around $1,200. And getting into the actual design details, it was rumored that it's going to be featuring a notch design just like the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pro. And just to give that some proof, if we go to Ross Young's leak from March, he said that the 2022 MacBook Air will have an increased display size from 13.3 inches to 13.6, which to me basically confirms the notch by adding a little bit more vertical pixel space at the top, just like they did with the 14.2 inch and 16.2 inch MacBook Pros because of the notch. And then back in March, Ming-Chi Kuo gave us some new updated leaks in terms of the 2022 MacBook Air, saying that it's first of all going to be mass produced in late second quarter of 22, which is at the end of June, which means it's totally possible for us to see the release at WWDC. He said it's going to have no mini LED display, an all new form factor design, more color options, and weirdly, he thinks it could have an M1 chip, which to me made absolutely zero sense, so I completely ignored that M1 chip leak because going further, Mark Gurman confirmed that the redesigned MacBook Air is gonna have an M2 chip, and he expects the M2 chip to have an 8-core CPU like the M1, but with a 9-core or 10-core GPU, so 2 more GPU cores for the basic M2. And then going further, there was actually evidence of the M2 chip within some software that was spotted ahead of the March event, and that was for an 8-core CPU and a 10-core GPU. And then once again, that brings us back to the leak from Mark Gurman saying that 9 new Macs with 4 different M2 chip variants are coming, including a MacBook Air with an M2 chip with an 8-core CPU and 10-core GPU. Now, that is why I don't believe in Ming-Chi Kuo's leak where he said that it could just have an M1 chip, which did not make sense to me at all. However, there was a tweet from Chance Miller saying that Ming-Chi Kuo told him that the M1 could be a modified version of the existing M1 and that the actual M2 could be pushed to 2023. And really it just comes down to marketing names, and we all know Apple's history there. So what if the M2 that he's talking about, the actual M2, is gonna become the M3, and this modified M1 is gonna actually become marketed as the M2, which is why Ming-Chi Kuo could have messed that up in terms of his leak. And that brings me to a huge leak from Shrimp Apple Pro saying that the A16 chip and the M2 chip could be stuck using the same A15 chip technology, which is TSMC's N5P, as you can see right here. And this basically confirms that it's going to be using 2nd gen 5nm, which is the same technology that the A15 is based on. And he confirmed that it's not only going to be the A16, but also the M1X question mark, whatever the name is, chip that's going to be modified, which he then came back and said his sources agree that the M1X could actually be the M2 chip instead, which is exactly what I have been saying, with 4 high-performance cores, 4 efficiency cores, and 10 Apple GPU cores. So this could be a huge upgrade from the M1, and that's going to be the modified M1, which is going to be branded as the M2, and the real M2 is going to get delayed until 2023 and titled the M3. And the crazy thing about that leak is that it actually confirms a different leak from November of 2021 from The Information, and their report said that the 2nd generation chips will use an upgraded version of the 5nm process used for the M1, M1 Pro, and M1 Max, which is exactly what Ming-Chi Kuo told Chance Miller. And they went on to say that the 2nd generation chip with just 1 die will be included in the long-rumored redesigned MacBook Air, as well as in some iPads, and that chip is codenamed Statin. Now that is very, very important, because a few months later in March of this year, 9to5Mac came out with an exclusive leak saying that a new MacBook Air and 13-inch MacBook Pro with the M2 chip are coming later this year. And they said that the MacBook Air is codenamed J413, and it's gonna feature the M2 chip, which is internally known as Statin. So there's that name once again. And here's the craziest thing. They said it's based on the A15 chip, which I didn't want to believe, but Shrimp Apple Pro basically confirmed that it's based on the A15. And I do want to mention that they said that a new Mac Mini with the M2 could be coming this year as well. And that brings us to another leak from April where Samsung was going to be helping Apple with the M2 chip. And the crazy thing to notice here is that they said it's expected that Apple will introduce the M2 processor in the first half of the year, which is before July, so it would be perfect for a WWDC reveal. And just to add the nail in the coffin, Mark Gurman came out with a report saying that the M2 MacBook Air is going to be among the most likely WWDC hardware announcements. And he added that if there's any hardware at WWDC, it'll likely be on the Mac side, with Apple aiming to launch the next MacBook Air with M2 chips at the conference, despite some of the supply chain issues that are going on. And he did say that developers say that Apple employees are increasingly using next generation MacBook Airs with their apps, which is a sign that the new Mac is close. And this finally brings me to a leak thread by Gio Riku McGuire Wood saying that the MacBook Air refresh is happening at WWDC with new colors and modified chassis design, slightly larger battery with the M2 chip, no Face ID in the top display camera area this year, which basically confirms the notch is coming. Battery life is going to be improved compared to the current M1 MacBook Pro, which is actually very good thanks to improved efficiency of the new M2 chip. And this is basically the final nail in the coffin that wraps up all the other leaks and rumors that leads me to say that I am 100% confident that an M2 MacBook Air is coming at WWDC. And in terms of the Mac Pro, I do agree with McGuire Woods saying that we could get a one more thing type of teaser, but I don't think we'll be getting a full announcement. And there's a chance that it could be announced later, or it could just come out in December. Who really knows? So we'll have to see. But the M2 MacBook Air is in the bag, I believe. So if you totally disagree with me, then comment down below. But if you enjoyed this video, click the circle above to subscribe, because WWDC is going to be amazing and we're going to be covering everything that comes out. Definitely check out one of those two videos right there. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.